In a world where political maneuvering and strategy seem to dominate global affairs, it's impossible to ignore the echoes of history reverberating through modern-day politics. If you've ever wondered why politicians, regardless of their political orientation, often prioritize power and stability over moral purity, you've likely encountered the principles of Niccolò Machiavelli, one of the most influential and controversial political thinkers of the Renaissance. His ideas, encapsulated in works like The Prince, have been the subject of endless debates, critiqued for advocating ruthless political tactics, but also lauded for their stark realism. Machiavelli's vision of politics wasn't built on lofty ideals or a moral code. Instead, he presented a cold, calculating approach focused on the practicalities of power, what today we would call Realpolitik. This philosophy, grounded in the understanding that the ends often justify the means, has remained remarkably relevant in today's political landscape, where leaders must navigate an increasingly complex world of alliances, conflicts, and shifting national interests. Whether it's in the corridors of Washington, the halls of the United Nations, or the presidential palaces of global superpowers, Machiavelli's principles have found their way into the very fabric of modern governance. But how does Machiavelli's Realpolitik relate to our own time? Can the strategic thinking he proposed centuries ago help us make sense of today's political dynamics? And, perhaps most importantly, what does all of this mean for you as a citizen, navigating a world that often feels unpredictable, divisive, and beyond your control? Machiavelli's Realpolitik, navigating modern politics. In a world where political maneuvering and strategy seem to dominate global affairs, it's impossible to ignore the echoes of history reverberating through modern-day politics. If you've ever wondered why politicians, regardless of their political orientation, often prioritize power and stability over moral purity, you've likely encountered the principles of Niccolò Machiavelli, one of the most influential and controversial political thinkers of the Renaissance. His ideas, encapsulated in works like The Prince, have been the subject of endless debates, critiqued for advocating ruthless political tactics, but also lauded for their stark realism. Machiavelli's vision of politics wasn't built on lofty ideals or a moral code. Instead, he presented a cold, calculating approach focused on the practicalities of power, what today we would call Realpolitik. This philosophy, grounded in the understanding that the ends often justify the means, has remained remarkably relevant in today's political landscape, where leaders must navigate an increasingly complex world of alliances, conflicts, and shifting national interests. Whether it's in the corridors of Washington, the halls of the United Nations, or the presidential palaces of global superpowers, Machiavelli's principles have found their way into the very fabric of modern governance. But how does Machiavelli's Realpolitik relate to our own time? Can the strategic thinking he proposed centuries ago help us make sense of today's political dynamics? And, perhaps most importantly, what does all of this mean for you as a citizen, navigating a world that often feels unpredictable, divisive, and beyond your control? Welcome to the unfolding journey. Before we dive deeper into Machiavelli's Realpolitik and its relevance in the 21st century, I'd like to take a moment to thank you for tuning into our channel. Here, we're on a mission to unpack the complexities of the world around us, from the realms of politics to philosophy, history, and beyond. By exploring these intricate subjects, we aim to encourage thoughtful discussion and a deeper understanding of the forces shaping our world. If you're curious about politics, history, or the intersection of the two, you're in the right place. Now, let's continue with our exploration of Machiavelli and his enduring relevance in today's political climate. Niccolò Machiavelli was born in 1469 in Florence, Italy, during a time of great political instability. Italy was not a unified country, but rather a collection of fragmented city-states, each vying for power. Machiavelli's own career as a diplomat and military advisor in Florence exposed him to the ruthless realities of power politics. However, it was his political writings that would cement his legacy. Machiavelli is perhaps best known for his book The Prince, 1513, written during his exile after the fall of the Medici family in Florence. The book provides advice to rulers on how to gain and maintain power. The The famous phrase, "the ends justify the means," encapsulates the essence of his philosophy, which prioritizes the stability of the state above all else. For Machiavelli, a ruler must be willing to use any means necessary, whether they are ethical, moral, or otherwise, to secure the state's interests. He argued that virtue, in a traditional moral sense, was often irrelevant in politics. What mattered most was the effective use of power and the leader's ability to maintain control, navigate alliances, and crush threats to their reign. Machiavelli's approach to politics is often called Realpolitik, a term that suggests an emphasis on practical politics over ideological or ethical considerations. While this might seem cynically pragmatic, it is grounded in the recognition that power dynamics shape the world more than ideals or good intentions. For instance, Machiavelli famously wrote about the necessity of a leader having virtù, a term that does not refer to virtue in the ethical sense, but to the capacity to adapt to changing circumstances and take bold actions when necessary. The Machiavellian ruler is not bound by ideals of justice or righteousness, but is instead focused on the pragmatic demands of the present, using any tool at their disposal, be it force, diplomacy, or deception, to ensure survival and success. Realpolitik in the 21st century. Why it matters today. Machiavelli's insights were not bound by the time in which he lived. In fact, his Realpolitik approach has proven incredibly adaptable, even in the face of contemporary global challenges. Let's explore how these principles still resonate in modern politics. Global power struggles, a changing world order. The concept of Realpolitik is particularly useful when analyzing the geopolitical tensions of the modern era. Take, for example, the US-China rivalry. As the world's two largest economies engage in a complex and multifaceted competition, it is clear that both nations are playing a Machiavellian game. The United States, as the established global superpower, seeks to maintain its position through strategic alliances, economic influence, and military dominance. Meanwhile, China, emerging as a global challenger, has utilized its economic power and expanding military presence to assert its interests on the world stage. In this context, Realpolitik manifests in both countries' approaches to diplomacy and foreign relations. The US has forged alliances with nations like India, Japan, and Australia to counterbalance China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific region. Meanwhile, China has cultivated ties with countries in Africa, Latin America, and even Europe, employing economic incentives and investments to win strategic partnerships. In this global chess game, the leaders of these nations, like Machiavelli's prince, are not motivated solely by ideals or morality. Instead, they operate with the understanding that maintaining or expanding power requires pragmatism and adaptability. Alliances are forged based on mutual interests rather than ideological alignments, and economic or military pressure is often used as a tool of statecraft. Domestic politics, the battle for power. Realpolitik doesn't just play out on the international stage. It is equally relevant in domestic politics. Consider the way political parties and leaders engage in the American political system. Elections are rarely decided by lofty ideals or abstract values. Instead, they are often shaped by strategic considerations, targeting key swing states, influencing public opinion through media, and exploiting weaknesses in the opposition. In recent years, the rise of populist leaders like Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, or Jair Bolsonaro has drawn attention to the increasing appeal of Realpolitik in domestic politics. These leaders often embrace Machiavellian tactics, manipulating public sentiment, bypassing traditional political institutions, and consolidating power by weakening checks on executive authority. These actions, though controversial, highlight the enduring relevance of Machiavelli's insights in the pursuit of political power. The rise of political cynicism. In a world of increasing political polarization and disillusionment, Machiavellian Realpolitik has also contributed to a growing cynicism in politics. Many citizens now view politicians as self-interested figures who will say or do anything to retain power. Whether it's bending the truth, engaging in smear campaigns, or shifting stances based on public opinion, modern politicians often seem to embrace a Machiavellian worldview, where the pursuit of power trumps ethical consistency. This has led to a growing divide between the political elite and the general public, with many citizens feeling that the political system is rigged or that their voices are insignificant in the grand scheme of power struggles. Machiavelli's vision of a ruler who is willing to do whatever it takes to preserve their authority is disturbingly relevant in this context, fueling skepticism and distrust in democratic institutions. What this means for you: informed citizenship in a Machiavellian world. As citizens in a world dominated by Realpolitik, it's easy to feel powerless. The political process often seems distant and unresponsive to the needs of everyday people. However, understanding the principles of Machiavelli and how they manifest in modern politics can empower you to become a more informed citizen. Machiavelli's work calls for a deep understanding of the dynamics of power. He didn't simply write to guide rulers. He wrote for anyone who wished to understand how politics worked. Today, citizens can apply his lessons by recognizing the strategic calculations that underpin political decisions. Rather than idealizing political leaders or parties, we should critically evaluate their actions and motivations. When politicians make decisions based on pragmatic considerations, such as economic interests, national security, or the pursuit of power, recognizing this can help us better understand the forces at play in our own political systems. Moreover, Machiavelli's emphasis on virtue reminds us that political success requires adaptability, resilience, and an understanding of the shifting tides of power. In an era of rapidly changing global and domestic circumstances, the ability to navigate these changes, make strategic decisions, and think critically about the consequences of those decisions is essential for anyone wishing to make a meaningful impact on the world. Machiavelli's approach to politics, often seen as cold and calculating, remains one of the most insightful and enduring frameworks for understanding the complexities of power. Realpolitik, with its focus on practical and strategic decision-making, offers valuable lessons in navigating the modern political landscape. As citizens, we must be aware of the forces shaping our world, recognizing the ways in which power and pragmatism drive the decisions of our leaders. Armed with this knowledge, we can become more informed, engaged, and proactive in shaping the future of our societies. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Machiavelli's Realpolitik and its relevance today, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. By subscribing, you'll stay up to date with more thought-provoking content that unpacks complex topics and encourages informed,